you the moderator? You want to have this mic?
My one mic, and then these guys will share. Is there an on-off?
Just always
No,
live.
my audio guy will take care of that.
Biggest panel in history.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
All right. So, hi, everybody. I'm Brian McCollum with the Detroit Free Press. Thanks again for coming out and for sticking around for what I think will be a very lively panel discussion here tonight. I've got J.J. Kramer, son of Barry Kramer, and one of the producers of this film you just saw. We got Scott Crawford, the director, longtime journalist of his own. Jan Uhelski, longtime Creem writer, another producer, and someone you saw quite a bit on screen. Susan Whitehall, who you may know for her work at a newspaper in town, but who was a longtime Creem writer herself. Margaret Kramer, executive producer. And Mr. Don Was here on behalf of Concert of Colors, where he'll once again be doing his All-Star Review in July. So I think I'll kind of throw this to Jan, Scott, and JJ to start. Just the genesis of this thing and how it came to be and how the vision, what we just saw on screen, evolved.
It really started with Jan.
Well, it was a serendipitous thing. I was home to see my parents.
Eat the mic.
I was home to see my parents, and I was having breakfast with Connie Kramer, and she said to me, JJ's thinking of leaving the law and coming home to be his dad. And I go, no, I got a better idea. I work for a guy who made a film on the DC punk scene, and he's always asking if he can do a Creem documentary, and this is over pancakes. I go, I'm gonna put the two of them together, and then everything flowed from that.
I mean, thank God for pancakes. I mean, yeah, and then when I was finishing the last film that I did, which was a film called Salad Days, it was about the punk scene in DC. And I was finishing that up, and I reached out to JJ through Jan and said, look, man, this is a story I've always wanted to tell. In another life, I was a magazine editor. Jan was actually my senior editor for 5, 6, 7 years. So I knew the world that this, existed in. My world was a lot less dramatic, but I knew it and understood it, and so I reached out to JJ, and we hit it off, and we worked nonstop. I mean, literally every day on this thing for almost 4 years. So.
Yeah, it was. It's incredible to kind of think back how this all came together, and I'm forever grateful to Jan for putting Scott and I together. I'd been approached a number of times over the years to do a Creem film, a Creem documentary, and just never fully aligned with the vision and the story that particular person wanted to tell. And when Scott and I started talking about what his vision was, it immediately clicked. And then when Jan, Scott, and I really started getting into the creative here, we kind of made a pact that we were going to tell a warts and all story, and that we weren't going to pull any punches, and that was very important to me. There's been other Creem projects over the years that have been a little bit revisionist history or not quite hit the nail on the head. So it was very important to us that we took a different path, and I think we accomplished that.
What sort of discussions did you guys have early on about the sort of the voice of the film and the tone and the way the story would be framed?
I mean, I had been working on an outline for a while that I sent to JJ early on, but I think to JJ's credit, I said to him at the very beginning, like, what's off limits? Is there anything off limits? Because we need to tell this story honestly and as truthfully, you know, and as JJ said, warts and all, and he said nothing's off limits.
Except the pictures of me naked as a baby. Those were off limits.
Well, yeah, we duked it out over that a little bit, but that might make it into the DVD extras.
So some of that great vintage footage that we saw tonight, did you always have that on? Did you know that existed? Was it just sitting there waiting to be tapped into?
There was some of the footage that we had seen before, but there was a good chunk of it that was actually uncovered in an unmarked box in my mom's basement. I just happened to be rummaging through some stuff down there and came across a box with a bunch of old videotapes in it and thought to myself, well, this looks old. Maybe there's something cool in here. And that's how we got some of the great footage of Lester and Sue and Robert Duncan in the Birmingham offices.
So let's talk about Creem. Jan, Susan in particular. The people who were drawn to the Creem offices, what was the sort of unifying allure for this cast of characters who wound up there?
I think that we had no place else to go. There's a scene in the movie where I try to apply for a job at the South End, and they said, nah, go down the street to Creem. But all of us we were really misfits. And I have this idea that we were like the people in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Like we were making mountains out of mashed potatoes, and we found all these other people making those same mountains, and we found each other. So the miracle happened because we were all so off, and we were creating something that was equally off, but it spoke to people. Because I don't know, maybe it's just Detroiters, but you know, we take pride in being eccentric and being like, fuck you. So that's what translated to the magazine.
Well, and we really didn't mean to not be corporate. It was just organic. It was the way we were. And you know, publicists would call up and say, well, so-and-so promised us a cover. If you give you an interview with this artist, they got to be on the cover. And we'd say, no, we just don't do that. And who were we to say that? Well, we did, and you got away with it. So we were definitely kindred spirits, and we liked doing what we're doing, and we did it in Detroit because nobody bothered us here.
This dichotomy that was drawn in the film between Creem and Rolling Stone, these kind of, were you guys real aware of this at the time? Was it a conscious part of your mission in a way?
Well, I mean, when you think about the origin story, I mean, we really did take a bite off of Rolling Stone by calling it Creem. I mean, that was not accidental. And they were like, I mean, this is an auto town. It's Ford and Chevy, you know? It was like Creem and Rolling Stone. We were like neck and neck. And, you know, we tried harder. I mean, all those dualities. But, you know, there's a certain group of people that were attracted to Creem, those non-corporate types, those people who didn't like James Taylor, those people who wanted everything a little off. So, I mean, I think we struck gold by tapping into those types of people.
You know, when Barry died, though, Cameron Crowe called me up and said, what can we do to help? We, meaning Rolling Stone. I'm like, what do you mean? You're going to come proofread for us? He said, yeah, if you need it. I'm like, no, it's okay, we got it covered.
So Don, as a guy growing up in Detroit, and I guess by this point you were starting to carve out your own music career, but you're a music fan. What did Creem mean to you, and what was it about the environment in Detroit that you saw that would sort of allow something like this to spring up here?
Well, I love Creem. You know, I'm just... I probably shouldn't even be sitting up here except as a representative of people who lived here and bought the magazine and lived in the milieu. I thought that fuck you irreverence was kind of resonant of the vibe of the city, you know? I mean, it's a very unpretentious place, and the people don't want to conform to those conventions. And I thought the magazine... It was both hopeful, especially, you know, I think Dave in particular was incredibly hopeful and optimistic and idealistic. And the blend of the two, the cynicism and the hopefulness, I thought it really captured the vibe. And I think you did a great job of capturing it in the film as well. Really, really beautiful job.
Thank you. What is your own particular theory? I think there are a lot of them that float about why Detroit became such an explosive music town in the 60s and 70s. Why did so much great stuff and groundbreaking stuff come out of here?
Well, we could talk about it for a real long time. I'm trying to think of the short answer. I think it's a combination of having people from really disparate cultures, from not just from the country, but from all over the world coming here after World War II to find work. And the nature of the situation we were all in, which is that it was a one-industry town. I don't remember ever seeing a limousine when I was a little kid. There might have been one parked out at the airport, but there was really no point in driving around like that. Everybody's fate was, everyone's fate was in the same hands of the auto companies and the economic success of that. And I think that leads to a really honest, unpretentious culture. And because of all the cultures that were here, is a really rich culture too. And I think that's where all the great music comes from.
So Margaret, can you talk a little bit about the role of women in Creem, what we saw chronicled here in Creem history, and in terms of the actual process of the making of the film itself?
Oh, sure. It was actually the emergence of the women in the narrative that really drew me to the film. Well, firstly, my husband Wayne was in the film and he scored the film, but when Scott initially and Jan approached Wayne about being interviewed, he did not hesitate to agree because he had so much to share on the subject. And, you know, a lot of times people who are in this film get asked to be interviewed on topics that they have just a limited knowledge of, and they don't really add that much passion to the story. And in this case, Wayne jumped at it because he realized that the story had been untold, and he wanted to make sure some things were sort of burned in amber after all this time. So that was my initial interaction, and the first time I met JJ and really started to understand the family of the Creamers outside of the publication. So when I started to watch the Rough Assembly with Wayne in it, I realized the narrative was going to become much richer for the emergence of these powerful women who really, even to this moment, are not explored yet. That this thing called Creem Magazine in a city called Detroit, where things were made I mean, I come from Youngstown, Ohio, and when I was a child, Creem to me was magic. I had older brothers who would leave it on their dressers and upset my old country Lebanese parents, and were like, what is it? Like the film said, it was like, might as well have been Playboy, and it was rock and roll personified. So for this thing to come out of Detroit, where all you did was make things, it was like the Holy Land to me. And the 10-year difference between my older brothers and me was, it was a world of life lived. So at 8 rather than 18, I was like, this is really dangerous. So for me to be involved in the film as a producer and to help this come to shape was monumental, because I have yet to find a publication about pop culture that was secretly run by women, these powerhouses to my right, who were the drivers behind the men who essentially are known for paying the bills at the magazine. And I'm so proud to be part of the emergence of that story. And I'd also like to just note that J.J. Kramer is not only the son of Barry, he's also the son of Connie. So let's talk about that incredible passion there. And the dysfunction of the Kramer family is as fascinating to me as the dysfunction of the family that is this family of editors. And I really harped on that in my notes, probably to the point of upset to our production team. But I kind of really felt like we are at a time where women who are my age, who are making decisions about film and making decisions about music and making decisions on the quad and making decisions in Congress, feel like we've got to find the root of this. And they were risk takers. I mean, what they wrote was enough to get them in trouble then, and really to get them in trouble now. And that in and of itself is a bit chilling to me, that 50 years on, we're still discussing it. But wow, what a risk they took. And I love them for it. So that was kind of a lot, but I don't know. I guess I got one shot at it, so I'm laying it on you.
So, Sue, some who've looked back at those Creem days and maybe used the word misogynist, I think there's a distinction you were hoping to elaborate on a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen in some of the reviews of the film, and they've all been positive reviews, but I've seen a few references to misogyny, which I think is a shame because, you know, sexism is one thing, that's fair. You know, looking back, I wouldn't judge it by today's standards, but misogyny, no, I didn't see that, and maybe, I don't know, maybe once or twice. Come on.
You know what I think is even more important? The real equality is the reason there were so many women and we weren't prejudiced against is that we would all work for $25 a week. And it's
well,
like we worked cheap.
It was 100 when I got there.
Well, when I got there it was $22.75. Thank you, Charlie Orange, for telling me after taxes. But the fact was, we had to live on that, and because we'd worked cheap, it was just incidental that we were women, so it actually worked in our favor. I mean, the greatest advantage was to interview some rock star who thought you were just a little piece of fluff and didn't realize that there was a mind there and like razor-sharp observations. And Sue and I got away with everything. Roberta Kruger, who's here, who preceded us, her too. I mean, you know, we were just like the stealth crowd who got there only because we were cheap, but everybody did.
Yeah, and Barry had this, you know, we'd have to argue with Barry and tell him, no, we're going to do this, and yeah. He told me I was too young and too female to be editor at the time. And I'm like, well, I'm going to do it anyway. It's like I was going to show him. And then he said, okay, you got the job.
So you two must have some good anecdotes about some artist backlash moments. That irreverent sort of voice was great for readers, but I'm sure it was not always welcomed by the folks who were writing about it. Are there any particular incidents that jump out of bands that backlash from some of these bands?
I don't think the backlash, I think it's the front lash. I mean, I remember going in to interview Rick Wakeman, and he answered the door in the towel, and he wouldn't put clothes on. So I just sat there and interviewed a guy in a towel, you know? I mean, that happened a lot. It was a little unnerving, but you just had to act as if it didn't matter. I mean, I'm sure Sue had it. Didn't you have a Ted Nugent? Huh? Didn't you have a Ted Nugent story?
Well, yeah, he took us all over his farm, and he messed up our car. Well, he messed up Kathy Guzzi's, her car. But, you know, it's like it was an advantage to be a woman in that situation more than it was a disadvantage because you'd get more out of them. They would open themselves out more, you know. I mean, Robert Plant and I got into an argument because he said, oh, I remember you from the Cream House on Cass. And I said, I was in high school then. He goes, well, excuse me. You know, it was all in good fun, and they loved Cream, so it made it really easy to get to them. And we never had any problem, usually, talking to them.
Did you ultimately land all the artists you were hoping to in terms of on-screen appearances? Was there some resistance maybe early on from certain folks?
There may have been a few here and there. Less so with artists than I think probably contributors. I could be wrong, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I think that, I was just, maybe some residual Barry stuff.
Yeah, that's fair to say. That was one of the interesting things going through the filmmaking process is we ran into a handful of folks that didn't necessarily leave on good terms with my dad, and didn't get to have the last word, and then he went and died and got the last word, and they carried a grudge, 35 years, and were refusing to participate in the film for quite some time. I'm like, I don't know, he's been dead a pretty long time, guys, might want to get over it, But the beautiful thing was, a lot of these folks ended up participating, although reluctantly, and the whole process was very cathartic for everybody involved. So it took a little more work, coming at it from different angles, whether it was Jan sending an email or me making a phone call. We kind of worked these folks from as many different angles as we needed to get them on screen.
And in terms of some of these folks, like a Chad Smith, whose stories were the icing on the cake here, were these just people you kind of discovered as you went on, like, oh, Chad Smith's got a great Creem story?
Yeah, he actually reached out to us and said, he heard about the film, and he said, I got to be a part of this. And so his people reached out to us, and we went to his place in the Hamptons, and we shot the interview, and he could not have been more enthusiastic. He was really excited and, has been supportive throughout the whole process.
JJ, for you, 4 years old when your father passed away, what was this project about for you in terms of this kind of journey of discovery of who Barry Kramer, who your father was?
Yeah, it started out with me having a lot of questions that had gone unanswered for a long time, a lot of questions that I wasn't necessarily comfortable asking my mom or asking other family members, that I feel like I needed to go a different way to learn a little bit more about who my dad was and the relationships that he had with all the people that he crossed paths with. And I learned so much. It was eye-opening. It was really emotional. At times it still is. But I wouldn't have scripted it any differently. I got everything that I signed up for. Everybody that contributed on the film brought something to that. And I learned that he was this beautifully flawed individual who had these incredibly powerful and sometimes volatile relationships with almost everybody he came in contact with. And I learned small things, like he had this incredible sense of humor. I learned about his mannerisms, his tics, some that I have and that I've done my whole life, and I'm like, holy shit, that's where I get that from? So that was really cool as well. And one of the byproducts of the film on a personal level was I went on this journey to learn about my dad, but I learned a lot about me through that process as well. And so that, I think I'm a different person than when I started this project, and I'm forever grateful for having gone on that journey.
Thank you. Nice answer. Sue and Jan, hopefully this isn't interesting only to me as a working music writer in 2019, but how has this line of work changed in 40 whatever years? It had to be a lot different in 1975, I would think.
I think access is different. You'd go out on the road with somebody and you'd be on the road with them for two weeks. It's like Almost Famous, and now you get an hour. So I think that's a detriment to the industry. We could really get inside of a rock star and show people what I said in the movie about the stars' cars, that they're not all that different than we are. And you really get to know the person. I think that's changed. I think that's the most profound and biggest difference between then and now.
Absolutely, and I think people don't ask for enough now. Journalists roll over for publicists and say, oh, okay, I get 10 minutes on the phone, okay, with other writers, okay. But we would just say, okay, no, I'm not going to do it. Or, oh, we can't photograph that concert, well, we're not going to do the concert then. I think people put up with too much from the industry and from artists today. And, and there's not enough critical reviews, negative reviews.
Yeah. And it's the whole social media thing has transformed. People have so much more direct access now to artists in that way, or at least presented in the way an artist wants to present it. It may not be real. There was a mystique back then to a lot of this that you guys were helping channel out to the world.
We were the gatekeepers, absolutely.
We didn't want to destroy it either. I mean, probably my favorite incident ever was when I was on tour with Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page refused to talk to me except through an interpreter, and he made me ask questions to the publicist, although we all spoke English, and she would relay them to him, and it came, he answered me back that way. But the funny thing was, is I wrote it in the story, you know, so you wouldn't let them get away with stuff like that. And now people do it all the time. And you know, it's just, it's really a shame that you not get to see people in the act of behaving badly, because that's where the interesting stuff is.
I thought of a backlash that I didn't remember when we were talking about it earlier. Barry Manilow. I ran into Barry Manilow against my will backstage at a gig. I was introduced to him by my friend who was his record rep, Arista, at the time. And when he heard Creem Magazine, he started screaming at me. He said, Creem, I'm sorry, I'm gonna swear now. Lester Bangs called me a fucking putz. What kind of fucking rag uses a word like putz? So I went back to the office the next day. I'm like, thank you, Lester. Whenever I see Barry Manilow's face, I think of him screaming at me.
That was your public service announcement. That was mandatory. That was like an annual, let me warn you about fill in the blank.
So I'll just kind of throw this out to whoever. Does the spirit of Creem still exist anywhere in our modern media landscape or online? Is there anywhere in particular we can point that's Creem-esque?
I think it exists on the stage.
Creem Magazine exists on this stage.
I would say that Vice Magazine is probably a you know, not so distant stepchild of you know, what Creem's lack of self-consciousness to sort of drill toward the truth of it, whether it is pretty or not, or whether it sows the seed of skepticism. You know, it seems to me that it's not necessarily in the style, but it's in the mission. And, you know, The Intercept has moments of it, certainly on the political side, not necessarily on the art side. So, sure, I mean, you can't core out Creem informing the many decades of writers who were influenced by it. You know, myself included, even though I don't work as an editor anymore, I think there's something to be said for that risk-taking, and it's in a lot of places now.
My 2 cents here. I think that there are publications that may try to emulate Creem in one way or another, but in large part, what I see out there is largely productized and sanitized. So to answer your question, I'm not sure there's a publication out there that kind of nails it like Creem does. Someone should probably bring it back.
Yeah?
Don't you think it should come back? What do you guys think?
Bring back Creem. Bring back.
Are there plans in the wings?
I don't know a thing about that.
We're not making any announcements, but I will say that we have some things in the works. This is not the end of the story. There's more to it. Follow us on creemmag.com. There'll be updates there, but this is definitely not the end. This is the beginning.
Well, I think that's a great note to leave it on. Does anyone have anything else to chime in on that we didn't get to? Or?
I was just going to say, I think it's time for Stars Cars. Open up the new publication with the Stars Cars.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for coming out again. And remember, we do have 2 more screenings this week in Detroit. So we appreciate you coming out.
Love you, Detroit. Thank you.